So good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Today, Talent Finders podcast would like to introduce Cody Royle, a football coach, author, entrepreneur, businessman, and keynote speaker. Welcome, Cody.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate you having me.
So, Cody, firstly, congratulations on all your achievements. You have, over the last decade, coached the AFL while working in the corporate sector. This is such a great contrast in your career and completely polar opposites. Please, can you tell us a little more about your background and how it came about, and your journey into coaching the AFL team?
Sure, absolutely. Well, as you might be able to tell, my accent is Australian, so I'm from Melbourne, which is the heartland of Aussie rules football, which most people know as AFL.
Yes.
And so I grew up in that environment as a player, and then I didn't get drafted into the professional league. So by the time I was 23, I had started to, I was playing semi-professionally, but obviously working a job, and I'd started to move into the coaching side of things. So I was in a bit of a coaching pathway, and then at 25 decided to pack up a couple of suitcases and move to Toronto, Canada, which isn't an AFL hotbed by any stretch of the imagination. So the two have just been existing side by side for, like you said, a decade. And it's been really interesting being in a leadership role with a team and building my own team on weekends, and then, going into the workplace and big corporate organizations and seeing how they do it. So I've been exposed to, the sporting side, the business side, and, seeing how teams are motivated and develop skills and develop cohesion amongst them or don't.
Yes.
And so it's actually been really interesting, and we'll kind of get into talking about what I've been up to subsequently. But I've just, over the last decade, I kind of realized that I've been living this life, 24/7 of building teams and leadership and seeing how different organizations are doing it.
Amazing. So that leads me to the next question. So what are some of the lessons, both in the corporate world and the sports and coaching world, that have impacted you, and that you've been able to apply? And what do you feel, having both separated you from, or what do you feel in both sectors has separated you from others? And what do you believe to be the differentiating factors that you bring to the table?
There's certainly a lot of lessons. I mean, I wrote my book in 2017, and how I ended up breaking it down was there's chapters on recruitment, leadership, culture, and high performance, and they're the four key departments, if you will, or lines of thought that I think particularly businesses can look to sport and actually strip out the core lessons of how sporting organizations do it, which differs a little bit, because what we tend to do is we tend to think about sports as, a motivational category. Like we would bring the quarterback or the striker from the local Premier League team, or the whoever it is, the hockey player, in, and we would get them to give us a motivational talk. But I think if we look at, the team dynamics and talent optimization from sport, and we start to think about how they do recruit, and how more often than not they scout and they know who the next best player in the market is when someone goes down with injury, or some of the language parameters that they set out amongst teams for them to be able to communicate in short, sharp bursts, or communicate when there's 90,000 people in the stadium.
Yeah.
And it's extremely loud. If we start to think about those things rather than just motivation, I think that's where a lot of the lessons are, and that's why I wanted to write about them.
Yeah.
And that's what I think separates sport and sporting teams from business teams. I don't think we put any real effort into developing those teams, whereas in the sports world, that's all you have.
Yes, of course.
So the coach just has to work on the internal facing elements. So
Yes.
the communication patterns, or trying to upgrade the talent. So to answer the question on how I've been trying to differentiate myself since doing these interviews with people and writing this book, I've tried to really hone in on them, and I talk about them. I try to implement them in my own business or my own businesses, and then also just bring them to light and say, for other people, there might be some ideas here that you can grab onto and take for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's not to say you need to run your organization like a sporting team, but there's always one or two lessons that you can pick up, whether it's from the military or whether it's from sporting organizations, wherever it is.
Yeah.
There's these little nuggets that you might be able to take and implement. And so I'm just trying to bring those to light.
Perfect. So that brings me obviously to the next question. There is a big emphasis on leadership, especially at present. What would you say leadership is to you, and what do you feel separates you from others in terms of leadership?
This is a really good question. And yeah, you don't have to spend too long on LinkedIn to realize that leadership's a hot button topic.
Yes.
It's
kind of being used like candy. It's like entrepreneurship,
It is. It's that next version of entrepreneurship, the 2016 entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm cautious of, why don't I start there? What I'm cautious of at the moment in this broader discussion around leadership is the idea that there's one way. And talking of LinkedIn, you can become a little bit of an echo chamber.
Yes.
And I'm cautious of that, because that's not what I see, and I don't think the data would back up that everyone needs to be one type of leader. Like, you see the memes, great leaders do this, and there's 9 characteristics or behaviors. And so to kind of answer your question backwards, I'm cautious of that, because that's just not the case. And again, coming from a sporting environment, you see that there are still the very hard-lined, kind of 1970s US militaristic style leaders that kind of bark orders, and it's a little bit more rigid in their style. And they still win. They're still able to create environments that can ultimately get to the right outcome, or the outcome that they're looking for. And then there's also this new school of thought around more emotive leaders, and I'm just cautious of saying there's one way and one is better than the other. There are a whole range of different ways to lead. And so for me, it's really about not trying to lead in a way, or not trying to be someone else when you move into a leadership role, which I think happens. We tend to go from being an individual contributor and very good at the skills of our role, sales or accounting or whatever it is, and then we progress into leadership at age 40, and we've done the 20 years that we need to do to gain the experience. But then we change the job completely, and now we're almost purely a leader of people, and the skills are different. So I'd say that authenticity, and if there is one skill, I think that really separates people at the moment, it is humility, and understanding that you don't know everything, and that there will be there will be people that might have more knowledge than you, but you're still able to continue to guide the team and use your best skills to impact that team. I think that's what separates others. And then, like I said earlier, I've tried to model a lot of those things and pick up little things from people with much more experience than me as I go along, and interview them like you do. I have a podcast, so I get to speak to a lot of different people, and I just pick up little things along the way and morph them into my leadership toolbox, if you will.
Yes, it's amazing, and there's always something to learn from other people as well. So
there really is.
So one of the subjects that is talked about at the moment is team brands and the athletes' individual brands. The
Mm-hmm.
current challenge being talked about is that a lot of the power has been with the team management. And there seems to be pushback from some of the players themselves in terms of personal branding of being an athlete. The question would be, how do you believe the balance of the power struggle between the two?
This is a great question. I think it really depends on the sport.
Yes.
I live in Toronto, Canada, and so we've just won. The Raptors have just won
Yes.
the NBA championship, and if you look at the NBA as a case study, a fantastic sport in terms of their ability to highlight individual players and make them the center of focus. And it's kind of become a joke within NBA fandom that wherever LeBron James goes, people just follow him. So you can tend to become, if he's playing for the Cavaliers, you might be a Cavaliers fan, and when he goes to Miami, you become a Heat fan, and now he's at the Lakers, and you become a Lakers fan, and so you're actually a fan of the athlete more so than the team.
Than the team, yeah.
And so that's kind of one subset of what we're talking about, and then probably the other way would be the NFL or the Premier League, where the clubs are actually the brand, and you're going to support them regardless of who's playing for them. I'm not sure we actually need to sort out the balance of power. I think it can go both ways, and I think in an ideal world, both sides of that equation can come out better off. I certainly see a trend, and I'm not sure what you see or what your belief is on this, Karen, but I certainly see a move more towards the athlete having the power at the moment, just because of the rise of social media and the power of the ability for fans to connect directly.
Yes.
Whether
I
that
agree with you 100%.
Yeah, whether that be through social media or video games, to be able to play a video game against your idol is something that obviously a lot of people dream of, but that's that's something that you can do now. So you can go and talk to Russell Westbrook or David Beckham or whoever in a video game forum.
Yes.
And so that one-to-one connectivity is incredible for fans and for them to feel that closeness to the players. And we're going to start layering in technology. You're about to see stadium technology improve, virtual reality and things like that will be able to put you in the stadium from your home to get that closeness to the players. So, I certainly see it going more towards the athlete, but I think it should have anyway. I think the clubs had it their way for a long time and benefited for a long time. And now we're just seeing those scales even out a little bit. Because ultimately...
It's good. They have to.
Exactly. I mean, people in Green Bay, Wisconsin are always going to be Green Bay Packer fans. And so that's always going to exist. And athletes, needed to level up those scales. And they're just seeing the benefits of that now, I think.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So the lessons that can be learned from sports can be applied in business. What and how can we learn from the transition from sport into business and entrepreneurship, both while playing and once their career or the athlete's career comes to an end or the coach's career comes to an end? And what are some of the lessons we can learn from this, from both the athletes, and how do we apply these lessons from the game into that transition, if that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Been having a lot of conversations about this recently. My business, I have a business with my partner Travis McKenzie, and we operate in and around endurance sports, so triathlon and marathon running and cycling. And then my writing and what I tend to create content around for myself and my own brand is team sports. And so I've been really lucky in that I get to talk to a lot of athletes in transition, and not only kind of presume the types of lessons that they would be learning, but actually hear from them. And again, I might start with kind of backwards a little bit in what I'm cautious of. And
Yeah.
what I'm cautious of is, or what I hear a lot of, is that athletes tend to be forced into these corporate jobs. Like, let's say they don't have an entrepreneurial endeavor.
Yes.
They come out, they might get injured, and it ruins their athletic career. And now, the organization sets them up with a job in corporate, and ultimately they tend to just default to being pushed into sales because people presume that athletes are goal driven and they know how to be motivated and
Yeah.
all this kind of thing. And they end up really unhappy and not good at it because no one teaches them actually how to be a salesperson, nor necessarily do those skills equate. And nor do people think about the fact that probably a large majority of athletes don't actually enjoy being an athlete, uh, which is a bit of something that people struggle to come to terms with. But for a lot of these people, it's a day job to them as well, and they were good at it as a youngster, and they kind of ended up in it. But we don't take the time to really educate them around, or even ask what they might be good at.
Yes.
If I was looking at maybe a team captain, I would think, at the moment, they might actually be a really good recruiter or HR person. The ability to talk to people and understand people at a deeper level and communicate in difficult situations. That might be an HR play for that person. And so, I think we can do a much better job of not just pushing them into endeavors because we have this idea in our head about what athletes are.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the business side, and even within the entrepreneurial side, I think it would be the same. Like, they're not just, athletes aren't automatically entrepreneurial just because they're, again, goal driven and know how to overcome, have grit and know how to overcome challenges. That doesn't make them an entrepreneur.
No.
So yeah, to kind of flip your answer again, I know I'm kind of answering on the negative side a little bit, but I'd like to see agents, agencies, businesses start up to help with that transition, and actually, get some profiling in there, and like, let's understand these people before you just push them into the job market, and just kind of give them a desk and a computer, and have them on the 24th floor and say, okay, here you go, go and do your job.
Yeah.
These are some really talented people, but I don't think we set them up for success.
No, for sure not. So when it comes to athletes and their representation, what and how do they manage the players? And should athletes have entrepreneurial opportunities? And what does the management of the players do for the athletes once they retire? Because very often we see how, once they're done, the agencies don't really care what happens to them because they just after the next hot player or the next hot athlete. So what would your opinion be on that?
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, from what I've heard, and this comes from both team sports and individual sports, is it's still like that. And the second that your career's done, you're dropped. And what I think is really telling is people like Gary Vaynerchuk have started a sports agency for that reason.
Yes.
So when you take a step back and look at why someone like him would do that, it means that there's a massive gap and a massive opportunity there, and the service of the athlete is not being fulfilled. And so, going down that line of thinking, I think we've got a lot of work to do there in terms of, how we look after the athletes. And I don't think they're particularly, the vast majority aren't particularly well looked after during their careers.
Yes.
And I understand the challenges of that. I understand often they're in my world, 20-something-year-old men.
Yes.
And they have a lot of money, and they have a lot of influence, and trying to get a message through about setting some money aside and, you know, starting an entrepreneurial endeavor at night rather than going out to the nightclub is a tough sell. I've been there. I've been that person, and I understand that, but I still don't think we agents do that particularly well. And you're starting to see a lot more of the entrepreneurial side come out. I think, again, maybe it's just because it's more on social media.
Yeah.
But, you know, a lot of these men and women are starting it, you know, in the first couple of years of their career, which is great to see, you know, 20, 21, 22-year-olds who are, you know, at the, you know, we're recording this in the middle of the Women's World Cup.
Yes.
You know, Canada has a high-profile team. A lot of the girls on that team have little businesses going, you know, doing whatever, selling T-shirts. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
That's really encouraging and something that's probably been missing for a long time.
Yes, absolutely. So that leads me to the next question. So what are the lessons that we as entrepreneurs can learn from coaches and athletes by adapting to both change on and off the field? And how much have the rules changed? And have you found it easy to be flexible when things change?
I would say that the changing from an entrepreneurial perspective, or what it's done for me and my business partner, you know, we're both from an AFL upbringing.
Yes.
You know, my business partner was an elite triathlete as well, and having that background of having to adapt on the spot has really served us well. You know, we've morphed our business multiple times within the, you know, 3 years or so that we've been heads down on it.
Yes.
It started off as one thing. It moved into a different industry. We've changed, you know, reporting structures. We've changed how many people we have on the team, et cetera, and ended up in a completely different place. And I think that grounding in our sport has helped us navigate that really well.
Yes.
Because for all the planning and all the training that Aussie rules players or triathletes do, ultimately, when you get into the heat of battle, none of that really matters.
No.
It's, you know, it's a complete catastrophe. And for the people that don't necessarily know, Aussie rules, there's 18 players on each side. So you've got 36 players on the field. So it's, you know, anything could happen. And so I think, you know, from an entrepreneurial perspective, that's probably been the number one lesson that you've nailed from me, is that for all the planning and all the, you know, we've got the next iPhone or we've got the next Uber for this.
Yes.
You know, that plan goes out the door as soon as you hit the field. And so, you know, I think it's probably just a learned skill and something that you can kind of get used to. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily more comfortable with change or the speed of change, particularly in the business environment. But, you know, I think you can practice it and be comfortable changing tact, you know, based on what you see at the moment. And that's going to change every week, month.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you're comfortable like that, and I tend to be a lot more now,
Yes.
I think that's the big thing that we can strip out of it. And and so you can be flexible when things change, because, you know, the thing is, you don't get to decide when that is.
Yes, of course. It's
You know,
unpredictable.
you know, yeah, exactly. A new challenge can come on. You know, a whole myriad of things can happen to you in the business landscape that you don't get to choose. And so, yeah, having this kind of rigid framework around yourself and this one idea. You know, we tend to hear about the Amazons of the world, where Jeff Bezos just believed in the idea so much and just kept trying to build that one idea. But ultimately what happened was they would have had to have changed and be flexible a million times before they got to become, even a viable business, let alone what it is today.
Yes. No, makes sense. So as a coach, how involved do you become with the athletes beyond just coaching and applying your skill set as a coach? And how much influence do you have on the players beyond the field and their athletic careers, which lead into the transition after retirement?
Yeah, I'd like to have. So my team are amateurs, and so all of these guys have day jobs, and at the moment, for instance, we have 50 players on our squad, and we're working towards what is essentially our World Cup, which happens next August. So about 25 countries will fly down to Australia, and so if you think about it, we're similar to a national soccer team that is always getting ready for the World Cup, or to an Olympic athlete who's getting ready on the Olympic cycle. So having 50 players spread across Canada, from literally Nova Scotia to British Columbia, makes it tough to stay involved in their day-to-day lives. I'd like to do more in that, but I try to remain open to anyone that needs help or needs help off the field, and make sure that it's known, just because, again, we're not in the same location. And I think coaches, though, in general, can have a huge impact on players as they transition out of sport and get into their families or their business careers, or whatever they're going to do after their retirement. Some might even be affluent enough from their playing career to be able to retire and not have to work again. But I think that part of what athletes tend to miss is that coaching experience, and that guiding hand, or just a word here or there to help guide them in the right direction in tough times. Yeah. So that's why I really believe in coaching, and why I like to write about leadership, and why I beat that drum a lot now, is because I've seen it on a small scale, and I can only imagine what it's like in the highest of the professional leagues.
Yeah.
The impact that you can have on men and women's lives, and give them lessons and things to take away that they might not understand now, and they might not understand when they're a petulant 23-year-old, but all of a sudden they become a father or a mother, or they become a business owner, and then a lesson comes back to them, and you can just lay the groundwork for all these lessons for people. And I really believe in that power. And I'd love to see that idea come more into the business landscape, where it's less about, that kind of transactional leadership, where you only really have it when you work for that person.
Yeah.
And a little bit more towards that kind of fatherly, motherly figure, that maybe the person goes and works for someone else, but they can still come to you for that guidance.
Yeah.
I think we would really be a lot better off. Our well-being would be better off if that were the case.
No, I agree with you 100%. So, what would you say some of your greatest career highlights have been, both in sporting and in business?
Depends what day you ask me on this. From a sporting perspective, not really an achievement, but just something that I really want to experience. I got to play on the MCG. So, cricket fans might know it from the cricket, the Boxing Day tests. Aussie Rules fans would definitely know it. It's where the grand final is played, but essentially a 100,000 seat stadium. And, when I was younger and playing at an elite level, I got to play a curtain raiser there before one of the AFL finals. And, it's just something small that, from a memory perspective, that I really like. And I like to kind of go back there mentally and just think about what that was like. It had a big impact on me. And so it's not winning a championship or, kind of something physical necessarily, but the older I get, the more I gravitate more towards the intangible things
Yes.
from a sporting perspective, and away from the championships and all that, because I've won them as well. But yeah, the things like playing at the MCG, I think that was really important to me.
Yes.
And similar in business, it's little things like writing a book doesn't sound like much, but being able to achieve that and get that out and start to have an impact on other businesses and people that are doing business, and even just getting our business off the ground and getting it to a place where it's sustainable, they're career highlights. So
Yes.
I'm trying to do a better job of celebrating the little things, and
Absolutely. Because then
not
you
just
can really appreciate the big things, right?
absolutely, yeah. And the big things go away, and that's not the everyday. The everyday is the struggle, and so those. My wife said to me that I should celebrate the little things more. So I've been thinking about that a lot more. And so if you had asked me that question 6 months ago, I probably would have said some, trophies that we'd won. But I've changed my mindset on that.
Amazing. So let's focus a little on your speaking and the writing of your book. Was this a natural transition, or was this something that came along later in your career?
I'd say it was a natural transition. The book was just a moment in time. I'd been writing about sports leadership in particular for roughly 6 or 7 years, just blogging, and then just had an experience in the corporate world that just meshed the two together, and I could see very clearly, the parallels. And so, I already had a bunch of content, and I could kind of see the formula for a book. And so it just kind of came to me one day, as divine as that sounds. But I think that was a natural progression. I'm by trade, I'm a writer. So I, marketing writing as an example, or, customer experience, the way websites flow. That's kind of my world. And so being a writer and writing a book is kind of a natural transition.
Okay.
And then the speaking too, again, I've been coaching football for 12 years now. And so standing up in front of a group and delivering a message has kind of been my world for a long time. And so, it doesn't really
much
bother
easier
me.
for you. It wasn't like a difficult thing.
I'd say I certainly had a better launch pad than most. Again, and even if you go back further, I tended to be in the leadership group of most of the teams that I played on, and so that includes standing up and being willing to deliver tough messages, or stand up in front of a group and delivering good messages, or trying to educate on something. And so my rearing has tended to be standing up in front of groups of people. And so now, I can stand on stage, and if it's 10 people or whether it's 1,000 people, it doesn't faze me. I'd say they weren't necessarily deliberate in terms of their timing, but they were things that I felt ready to take on the challenge. I'm only 35. And so particularly when you're talking about leadership, age can kind of matter. There's still this idea that unless you've got 30 years of experience, how can you be telling me? But so there was a little bit of a thought process around that. But I felt ready, and it just felt like a good time to launch into those things.
Amazing. So as I touched on before, you've been a coach for over a decade. How have you managed to sustain such a long career in what is a notoriously fickle industry? And what are some of the skills you bring to keep not only yourself motivated, but also the athletes?
Yeah, I have the advantage of coaching at the amateur level, which means that kind of the hiring and firing of coaches I don't need to deal with. Which is great. I don't know how I would deal with that. But in terms of the skills, what I really love about what I'm doing at the moment is that I get to speak to all these different people from my world. And so, whether it's on my podcast or my book, or I'm writing another book right now, I get to speak to some of the people in my book. For instance, Joe Dumas, who is an NBA legend. He's in the Hall of Fame. He was on the Detroit Pistons team that beat Michael Jordan's Bulls twice, and they won 2 championships. And then he came back and built the 2004 Pistons team that won the NBA championship. So he's won as a general manager and as a player. Or like Ralph Kruger was an interview in the book, and he was a hockey coach, coached in Europe, and then ended up in the NHL, and then became the president of Southampton Football Club in the Premier League. And so the reason I'm saying all this is that how I kind of keep my skills up to date and keep adapting and impacting my athletes is to be able to have conversations like this and learn from those people and take little lessons from them about, the artistry of coaching and the artistry of leadership. So I'd say, to answer your question, is I study this stuff and I can look at, the situation that I'm in. Maybe our team isn't doing so well, or maybe we're doing really well, and I can pull these things from my toolbox that I've learned from Joe or learned from Ralph and implement them, which I'm obviously extremely fortunate to be in that position.
Yes.
But now that I think that's a real competitive advantage, in that particularly the breadth of sports that I get to speak to and learn from suits me really well.
Amazing. So how does sports mirror business? And do athletes gravitate to entrepreneurship both while playing and when they retire? If you want to create something great that will last generations, how does the athlete and the coach do this while playing?
It's a great question.
Thank you.
I think to answer the second part first, I think if this really comes down to the coach getting to know the athlete. And I think that's not something that is particularly well done, or has been particularly well done in our generation. I think it's starting to come into play now. And you can see kind of more, what you call modern coaches, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but someone like a Steve Kerr, you can imagine him really wanting to set his players up for success after their career, and actually having those conversations and wanting to know what they're interested in and what they're planning, and then helping them build that something that lasts generations.
Yeah.
And so I think that they're those, one-on-one conversations that aren't about skills or aren't about performance or aren't about the injury that the athlete have, but are about those, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? What do you want your family to remember you as? And if that's to build a business, go into some entrepreneurial endeavor, it kind of becomes incumbent on the coach to help them achieve that, help the athlete achieve that. And you're starting to see that more and more now, where it's a little bit more of a holistic idea of coaching, and not just can you dribble on your left hand or whatever it may be. And so, I think the thing that athletes have, to kind of answer the first part of the question, I think what they have is an opportunity to launch into entrepreneurship that maybe others don't have, in that they tend to come out with maybe a little bit more financial backing. And so it gives them the time to test a lot more quickly, and probably spend, let's call it 6 months or a year when they retire, and actually not have to work 9 to 5. And so that becomes a substantial advantage in that they can test more ideas and learn from, and you and I both know this, the kind of failing you kind of have to go through first.
Many times.
Exactly. So they get to go through that. And again, this is a broad stroke answer. They tend to have the money to be able to sustain that for 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
And so, there's that opportunity that I think really benefits them as well. That others might have to do a side hustle and try to get that business off the ground when they get home from work at 6 p.m. or whatever it is. And so, it's an advantage there for the athletic crew for sure.
Perfect. So the last question I have is, what would you say are the 3 key pieces of advice you would give to both entrepreneurs and those wanting to pursue a career in the AFL?
Well, it's going to be tough for those who want to pursue a career in the AFL. It's only played professionally in Australia, and with only 18 teams and capped amounts of players, that's going to be tough. But why don't I answer in terms of 3 pieces of advice for entrepreneurs, and I'd say the first one would be, it's funny, we were just talking about this try to fail more. And test things. And so, if you go and study entrepreneurship, even just from on your own, you learn very quickly that the original idea is never what comes out.
No, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so it's easy to gravitate towards the Steve Jobs message, and we had this one idea and that's what became the company. But that is such an outlier that it's almost worth just passing over completely, because that's probably not what your entrepreneurial endeavor is going to be. And so it becomes, test your idea more and more and fail and be okay with that, knowing that it's going to find its way naturally. If you just trust that process. And so fail more would be the first one. Secondly, and I'm big on this one right now, and this is what I'm starting to write my second book about, is put good people around you.
Absolutely.
And I again, going back to that Steve Jobs idea, is we have this picture in our head that he did the whole thing, but that's just what we've told ourselves in the storytelling. The reality is that he went and recruited and has been very open about the fact that he saw himself, or his most important role, as a recruiter. And you hear this over and over and over again in entrepreneurship, that without good people around you, whether it's a number 2, like a CFO or a COO, if you don't get that position right, the company just doesn't grow, or you hit a plateau and it just kind of becomes another small business. And yeah, even from my sporting experience, without the right talent, you're going nowhere. And so that would be the second piece of advice. And then the third piece is just enjoy it. I think we put so much pressure on ourselves, and that this should be enjoyable. We only get to live this one life, and yeah, it's just this so much stress on success, or this business being the one that makes it, or this whatever being the one that makes it. But I think you just need to enjoy the process, and if it's not this business, it can be another one, and you'll be okay. And we can find ways to, you can go back to the corporate sector and work for 2 years and try again. And yeah, there's just always this sense at the moment, this just overlaying fear that we have that it has to be this one, but it doesn't.
No.
So try to enjoy the process and not shy away from spending time with your family and shutting out friends because you're kind of always working. It's like actually have a balanced life, because you can do both. You can have a balanced life and be a successful entrepreneur or business person or sports person for that matter. You don't always need to be working or practicing.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Cody, for joining today and for all your knowledge and expertise. It's just very refreshing, when people come from an authentic place. So thank you so much for joining the show.
No, thanks for having me.